Hello, my name is James J., and this is my lecture on scope, or what can you cover in a short story. So, one of the things that when working with a short fiction form or any sort of form where you have a limited amount of word count, is that you can only cover so much. It's just the nature of the beast. If you have 500 words, 750 words, 1,000 words, you can only cover so much. And so you're not going to have the same scope in that sense as you would, obviously, if you're writing a 200-page novel, right? So you need to adjust what you can cover. And one of the things that oftentimes happens is that you'll be going through and you'll have the early beginning, you'll have your subject matter, you'll be writing very well, things are working out for you, and then you'll get towards that end and you're trying to get everything together and it won't possibly fit, and you're just kind of cramming the rest of the story in there, and it feels like you're cramming the rest of the story there as your sentence structure just crumples under the weight of everything you're pressing into that 500 word or 750 word story. So if you find yourself in that position, think about your scope. What can you cover? And so that those parts that are where you have a whole bunch of stuff shoved in there, and you'll know this feeling because you're all of a sudden making more general and vague statements and trying to just get everything in there, and all of a sudden the same stuff that was enjoyable, energizing writing is just becoming, that type of thing. It's an impulse. I think we all as writers can get that. We know when something's not working, even if we can't exactly articulate why. We can feel that it's not exactly working. So if you're in that area, that might be something to think about. Is this too big to all fit into this short story? And I think that there are several solutions if you find yourself trying to get too much crammed into the form. I think it's worthwhile to consider a couple things. Pulling that stuff out, but not necessarily just tossing it. Pulling that stuff out and see if it forms another story. It might be part of a series, so you might end up where you have you've been working with this 500 word form, and you keep getting more and more in there that you're surprising yourself with what's happening. And you want to keep listening to that story and expanding. Of course, you can keep going. For our purposes for the class, we've got some specific writing assignments because we're wanting to work on that idea of scope and what can be covered in the amount of space provided. But you can always take that and you can use that for your next story potentially. So if it's something I didn't get it covered in this story, pull it out, see if it's another one. The stories might be linked together. They might be totally different. It might just be a different tangent, but it's something to think about as a writer. I like to always have those extra. I always have those leftovers kind of thing, the scraps and that type of stuff. And so people are talking about that notion of upcycling with food now. So the same sort of idea. It's something that you can plant and reuse in another story potentially down the road. There's also too, I think that it's worthwhile when you're thinking about the scope of what you can get covered. I think it's worthwhile to think about this other notion that I'll call revision by expansion. So even if you get into a certain area and you've cut back, let's say that you've written yourself, I'm just throwing sort of random numbers out there, but let's say that you've written yourself 500 or 600 words and you're cutting that thing back and getting rid of the things that are more general and vague, and then you're down to 300 or 400 words. Now it almost looks like it's short if we're thinking about something that we're trying to get in a 500 word story. So one of the things then oftentimes you end up doing is expanding other details and working other parts of the story. And I think that is a natural tendency. So I oftentimes will sit there. Let's say I do have a piece. I think I'd mentioned before that for years and years I wrote a column for a newspaper. It had very specific word counts, 750 word counts, because you had to get on the page. You had to get all the other advertiser space, and your column only had a certain amount of space that it could fit in. And so that with that 750 word count, oftentimes I'd find myself writing 1,100, 1,200. I'm not exactly keeping track of it, but I got kind of a feel for what I'm getting covered. So I'll get 1,100, 1,200 words, and then I'll go back through and I'll sort of cut things back down to get it into that space. And then that might reshape the way that the document's working, the way that the story is working itself. And so then I'll start fiddling with it a little bit more, and I'll start expanding back out and flushing out certain images or certain concepts I'll continue to expand with, and I'll cut that back. And so a lot of times you end up writing so much, cutting back, then writing so much, and cutting back. I think that's a perfectly normal process when you're revising. I would encourage you to do that. The main thing is to keep track of, I think to keep track of is that you can only cover so much. But the nice thing is you can always write another story. So keep doing that. Any pieces that you cut, they're not eternally doomed. They might fit into something else. So that's my little mini lecture on the idea of scope, what you can cover, and then also related to that, the idea of when you cut things back, looking at that expansion, then cut back again, and that back and forth, that sort of seesaw. See what happens. Have fun with it, experiment. Good luck.